Thirsty white cops harass black woman, unaware she's their new chief. It was a crisp Monday morning when Officer Tanya Hill walked into the police department for the very first time as the newly appointed chief. The building was exactly what she expected, a little outdated, with walls that could use a fresh coat of paint. There were piles of paperwork on desks, cluttered offices, and a few too many empty coffee cups strewn around. But Tanya didn't mind. She knew this was just the beginning. Tanya had earned her position after years of hard work, climbing the ranks through the ranks of several police departments. She'd seen it all: bad cases, rough neighborhoods, and the challenges of managing a team of people who didn't always agree with her methods. But now she was stepping into a new role, one that brought both excitement and nerves. She'd been chosen to lead a department that was clearly in need of a fresh start. But there was something different about this place, something that made Tanya feel like she had to prove herself even more. As Tanya walked through the main entrance, she noticed the glances that followed her every step. Some officers nodded politely, while others avoided eye contact completely. She didn't take it personally. She was used to being the only woman in the room, and certainly the only black woman in a position of power. But she couldn't help but wonder, how would they react when they found out who she was? The department had been struggling for months. There had been complaints about lack of leadership, poor communication, and a general sense of stagnation. The old chief had left under a cloud, and things had only gotten worse in his absence. The officers needed someone who could set clear expectations, hold them accountable, and create a stronger, more positive environment. Tanya was ready to take on that challenge. But she knew that the biggest hurdle would be the department's internal culture, one that had been entrenched for years. Tanya knew that she was going to have to earn the respect of the officers, and that meant walking a fine line. She couldn't come in and start giving orders without first understanding who these people were and what motivated them. She had to find a way to connect with the team while also ensuring that they respected her authority. In her office, Tanya sat down at the desk and started going over her plans. She had already looked through the department's records and understood the struggles they were facing. It wasn't just the morale that needed fixing. It was also the lack of proper training, outdated equipment, and a deeply ingrained culture that didn't always promote accountability. Tanya was aware of the rumors that had been circulating about her. She'd heard whispers in the halls before her first day. Some of the officers were skeptical about a woman being in charge, especially a black woman. There were already murmurs of doubt and resentment, even before she had made her mark. But Tanya wasn't going to let those doubts stop her. She had worked too hard to get here, and she wasn't going to let anyone, no matter their background or beliefs, undermine her leadership. She stood up from the desk and walked toward the door, preparing to face her team. As she opened the door, she was greeted by the sight of the officers gathered in the main hallway, clearly waiting for her to make her entrance. The tension in the air was thick, and Tanya could feel the weight of their eyes on her. They were sizing her up, wondering if she was really up to the task. She took a deep breath and walked forward, maintaining her confident posture, refusing to show any signs of nervousness. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm your new chief, Officer Tanya Hill. I'm here to get things moving in the right direction. I expect all of you to give your best, and I will be doing the same. We have a lot of work to do, but I know we can make this department a place we can all be proud of." There was a pause. Some of the officers exchanged glances, while others shifted uncomfortably. Tanya didn't let it faze her. She knew this wasn't going to be easy, and she was ready for the challenge. As she walked down the hallway, she could feel the eyes of the senior officers following her. She wasn't sure exactly what they were thinking, but she didn't need to know. What mattered was how she carried herself. They could think whatever they wanted, but she was in charge now. In the break room, Tanya grabbed a cup of coffee. It was still early, and there weren't many people around. She overheard a conversation between a couple of senior officers, standing off to the side, their voices low. Tanya listened carefully, knowing that this was her first opportunity to get a sense of what was going on behind closed doors. "Can you believe they picked her?" One officer, Officer Steve Hayes, muttered to his partner, not realizing Tanya was standing just behind them. "A woman as chief, and a black woman at that, what are they thinking?" His words stung, but Tanya didn't let them show. She kept her expression neutral, even though inside she was ready to call him out on his ignorance. But she didn't do it then. Not yet. She wasn't going to make a scene on her first day. Instead, she smiled to herself. She knew she'd prove him wrong soon enough. Over the next few days, Tanya continued to observe her officers. She watched their interactions with one another, their level of professionalism, and how they handled calls. Some of them were efficient, others were lackluster at best. But what she noticed most was their lack of respect for authority. They didn't respect her, at least not yet. Some of them seemed to think they could get away with pushing boundaries, testing her limits. But Tanya wasn't about to let that slide. She was going to change things around here, no matter how much resistance she faced. The days passed quickly, and Tanya began to settle into her new role as chief. Every morning, she came into work early, reviewing reports and meeting with officers to get a feel for the operations. Despite the tension in the department, she was determined to make things work. She knew the team needed time to adjust to her leadership, but she also recognized that there was something more troubling brewing beneath the surface. Some officers weren't even trying to hide their disdain for her. Tanya had already started addressing some of the issues around training and protocol, but she couldn't ignore the uncomfortable atmosphere that lingered in the department. It was like a constant buzz of gossip and judgment, and the senior officers didn't bother to conceal their feelings. Tanya could feel it in the air, especially when she entered the briefing room, where the senior officers always gathered for meetings. Despite the tensions, Tanya stayed focused, understanding that her actions would speak louder than any words. But she also knew that change wouldn't come overnight. Some of the officers had years of experience, and their old habits were hard to break. They were used to a department where things were done a certain way, where disrespect could sometimes slip by unnoticed. Tanya knew she had to show them that those old days were over. One afternoon, Tanya decided to step out of the office for a quick break. It had been a long day, and she needed a moment to clear her head. She decided to head over to the local coffee shop down the street, a place she had visited a few times before when she first moved to town. It was small, cozy, and tucked away on a quiet corner, a place where she could sit down and relax for a few minutes. As she walked in, she noticed a few officers from her department sitting at a table near the back. They were chatting amongst themselves, their laughter filling the air. Tanya didn't think much of it at first. She ordered her coffee and took a seat near the window, hoping to enjoy the brief moment of peace. She tried not to pay attention to the group of officers, but their voices were too loud to ignore. "Did you see her today?" one officer, a tall man with a short-cropped haircut, asked. Tanya recognized him as Officer Brad Richards, one of the senior officers who had been with the department for years. "Oh, I saw her," another officer replied, laughing. "You mean the chief? What a joke. A woman in charge and a black woman at that. She doesn't belong here." The others laughed along with him, their voices full of amusement. Tanya's heart sank as she realized they were talking about her. She looked down at her coffee, trying to hide her emotions. The laughter continued, and she could hear them making more comments. They spoke about how they thought she was too soft, too inexperienced, and how they didn't believe she could handle the pressure of being in charge. "I'm telling you," Brad continued, "she's not cut out for this. They probably just put her here to check some diversity box." The words hit Tanya hard, but she didn't let it show. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was what she had expected, but hearing it so openly and so callously was a different thing entirely. Tanya knew that the officers didn't realize who she was, that they still thought she was just another officer, a woman who didn't deserve their respect. She stood up, her coffee cup still in hand, and walked toward the counter to pay. As she did, she caught a glimpse of their faces. Their smiles faded when they saw her. They hadn't expected her to be standing there, so close, so silent. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze, and all eyes were on her. Tanya turned around slowly, standing tall, and addressed the group. "Is there something you'd like to say to me, gentlemen?" Her voice was calm but firm. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. She wasn't afraid to confront them, not anymore. The officers froze. Brad quickly recovered, but the nervousness in his voice was evident. Chief, we didn't mean anything. We were just joking around, it's just, some guy talk." Tanya kept her gaze steady, not letting them off the hook. "I don't find your comments funny, and I don't appreciate being disrespected, especially not when I'm trying to do my job. I suggest you keep your opinions about me to yourselves and focus on doing your work." There was an awkward silence in the room as the officers shuffled in their seats, unsure of how to respond. Tanya didn't wait for them to say anything more. She paid for her coffee and walked out, leaving them behind. The encounter weighed on her all the way back to the department. She knew she had to address it head-on, but she wasn't sure exactly how to handle it just yet. She had to decide whether to make it an official issue or to let it go for the moment. But the reality was clear. This wasn't going to be easy. The officers who had spoken poorly of her had made it clear that they saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't deserve their respect. It wasn't just a matter of proving her skills. It was about breaking through the barriers they had built up in their minds. Back at the station, Tanya sat at her desk, replaying the scene in her mind. She wasn't angry, not at the officers, not at the situation. But she was disappointed. They had no idea who they were talking to, and that bothered her. Tanya had come a long way to get to where she was, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in the way of her success. The department needed a leader, and she was determined to be that leader, no matter how difficult it was going to be. She sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath and looking out the window. The day was still young, and there was plenty of work to do. She couldn't let a few ignorant comments derail her mission. Tanya knew she had a lot to prove, but she wasn't about to back down. The officers would learn one way or another that she was their chief, and they would have to respect her, whether they liked it or not. The next few days were filled with a heavy tension. Tanya could feel the weight of the department's judgment hanging over her. The officers had fallen into a routine of passive-aggressive behavior, no longer voicing their disrespect out loud, but their actions spoke volumes. Some of them avoided her completely, while others only paid her attention when they had to. It was clear they had not yet accepted her leadership, and Tanya wasn't sure how long she could let it go. Still, she remained focused. She had a job to do. Every day, she walked through the halls with confidence, making sure to speak to everyone, whether they spoke to her first or not. Tanya had learned early in her career that leadership wasn't just about having authority, it was about earning respect. And that was exactly what she was doing, one day at a time. But Tanya knew that it wasn't just about her. The department had serious issues: officers who didn't follow proper protocol, a lack of training for new recruits, and an overall culture of complacency. As chief, she had the responsibility to address these problems head-on. But there was also the delicate matter of rebuilding the officers' trust, especially those who had doubted her ability to lead. As the days passed, Tanya made small but significant changes. She introduced new training programs and revised the department's policies. She was hands-on, working with officers to demonstrate that she was more than capable of handling the job. Slowly, a few officers began to warm up to her leadership style. One officer, Detective Carla Simmons, a woman in her 30s who had been with the department for several years, started seeking Tanya's advice on cases. She was the first officer to come forward, acknowledging Tanya's skills and leadership. But Tanya knew this wasn't enough. She needed to do more. She needed the entire department to recognize her authority and respect her not just as a woman or a black woman, but as a leader. One afternoon, Tanya decided to take a walk around the town. It was a quiet, peaceful place, a small community with tight-knit families and small businesses. She had been there for a few weeks now and had started to get familiar with the area, but she still hadn't had much time to truly connect with the locals. She needed to learn more about the people she was protecting, their concerns, and what they expected from the police force. She strolled along the sidewalk, pausing to chat with shopkeepers and greet passers-by. It was a welcome break from the tension at the department. She smiled and chatted with a few people, asking about their day and how things were going in the community. It was moments like this that reminded her why she had joined the force in the first place. She wanted to make a difference, not just in her department, but in the lives of the people she served. As Tanya walked toward the local cafe, she saw a familiar face. Officer Steve Hayes, the same officer who had made the comments about her when they were at the coffee shop a few days earlier, was sitting at a table with a few other officers. Tanya's heart sank for a moment, but she didn't let it show. She walked over to them, offering a polite smile. "Good afternoon, Officer Hayes," Tanya said, trying to keep the tone neutral. Steve looked up at her, clearly startled. He hadn't expected to see her here. He quickly put down his cup of coffee and stood up, trying to mask his discomfort. Chief, didn't expect to see you here." He managed a forced smile. Tanya nodded, her expression unreadable. "I like to get out of the office when I can." It's important to connect with the community. She was about to turn and leave when she noticed something strange. The other officers at the table, who had been laughing and talking just moments before, fell silent. They all stared at her, their faces tense. Tanya didn't flinch. She knew they were still uncomfortable around her, but she couldn't let their awkwardness derail her. After a few seconds of silence, Steve cleared his throat. "It's good to see you out here, Chief. I hope you're adjusting okay to things." His voice was strained, and Tanya could tell he was trying to cover up his previous behavior. Tanya gave him a nod. "I'm doing just fine, thank you, but I want to remind you all that respect is something that goes both ways. You can't be disrespectful behind closed doors and expect me to let it slide. I'll be addressing the issue in the coming days." Steve's face turned red, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Of course, Chief, we're all just adjusting." Tanya could see the discomfort in his eyes. He wasn't fully accepting her leadership, but he was beginning to realize that his earlier attitude had consequences. Tanya decided to leave it at that for now. There was no need to press him further in front of the others. She smiled and turned to leave, walking back out into the quiet street, but her mind was racing. This moment, this small interaction, was a turning point. The officers were starting to realize that their behavior wouldn't go unchallenged. When Tanya got back to the department, she sat down at her desk and began to think about what had just happened. She knew it wasn't just Steve. He wasn't the only officer who had harbored those views, but he was the one who had been the most vocal. He had challenged her leadership in subtle ways, but Tanya was no longer willing to let that slide. She decided that it was time to act. She couldn't continue letting the officers get away with disrespecting her, even in small ways. She had to let them know that there were no more second chances. If they couldn't respect her, then there would be consequences. Tanya wasn't just a figurehead, she was the chief, and she was ready to lead. The next day, Tanya called for a department-wide meeting. She stood in front of the officers, her posture straight and her voice calm. "I've been patient," she began, her eyes sweeping across the room. "I've given you all time to adjust, but there comes a point when enough is enough. Respect isn't something you can earn through silence or by staying in the background. It's something you give, and it starts with me." Tanya paused, letting her words sink in. "I won't tolerate disrespect from anyone in this department, no matter their rank. If you can't accept my leadership, then you can find another place to work." The room was still. Tanya's words hung in the air like a weight. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, but others, like Detective Carla Simmons, nodded in agreement. Tanya knew she had to follow through on her promise. She couldn't let the officers think that their behavior could go unpunished. It was time for a change, and she was going to make sure it happened. As the meeting wrapped up, Tanya walked out of the room feeling more confident than ever. She had taken a major step in asserting her authority, and though it had been difficult, it had been necessary. Tanya knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it head-on. The officers who had doubted her were starting to see that she was serious, and that was exactly what she needed. The next step was clear. She would continue to build her leadership, one interaction at a time, and prove to everyone that she was more than capable of handling the job. The days following the department meeting were filled with a strange mixture of silence and tension. Tanya could feel the change in the air, but it wasn't all positive. There was still an undercurrent of resistance from certain officers, and she knew that it was only a matter of time before things came to a head. At first, it seemed like her words had made an impact. Some of the officers, especially the younger ones, were starting to show more respect. They followed her orders more closely, and some even began to engage in conversations about improving the department. It was a good start, but Tanya wasn't naive enough to think that everything had been resolved. There were still those who resented her position and her leadership. The most obvious source of tension was Officer Steve Hayes, who still hadn't fully come to terms with Tanya's authority. He was a senior officer with years of experience, and he had always been one of the most vocal critics of her appointment. Even though he had apologized in front of the others during their last interaction, Tanya could tell he wasn't completely sincere. His attitude toward her had shifted, but there was still an underlying sense of defiance. One afternoon, Tanya walked into the briefing room to find Steve standing at the front, giving a debrief to the rest of the officers. As soon as he saw her enter, he stopped speaking, his face flushing slightly. He quickly tried to resume the briefing, but Tanya could see the discomfort in his eyes. It was clear that he wasn't ready to accept her leadership, and he was making it obvious in subtle ways. Tanya knew she had to address this head-on. She couldn't let one officer undermine the authority of the entire department. She stepped forward and interrupted his briefing, her voice firm but calm. "Officer Hayes, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I would prefer if you let me handle the briefing from here," she said, making eye contact with him. "I need to remind everyone that I am the one in charge here, and I expect full cooperation from each of you." Steve opened his mouth to argue, but quickly closed it when he saw the look in Tanya's eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by someone he had once thought was unworthy of the position. The room fell silent as the other officers watched the exchange. Tanya stood tall, refusing to back down. "Thank you, Officer Hayes," she said with a nod before turning to address the entire room. "Now let's get to work." The meeting continued without further incident, but Tanya could sense the tension building. She knew Steve wasn't going to let this slide, and there were other officers who shared his sentiments. The problem wasn't just one person. It was a deep-rooted issue within the department. There were officers who didn't respect her because of her gender and race, and others who didn't respect her because they didn't think she had earned her place. Tanya had to change that mindset, but she knew it wasn't going to be easy. Over the next few days, Tanya began to see more signs of defiance. Small things like officers not following through on assignments or showing up late for shifts. It wasn't outright rebellion, but it was clear that some people were testing her patience. Tanya couldn't ignore these actions. They were a sign that her leadership was still being questioned. One evening, after a long day of meetings and paperwork, Tanya decided to stay late and catch up on some reports. The department was quiet, with most of the officers having gone home for the night. She sat at her desk, working through the mountain of paperwork, when she heard a knock at the door. "Come in," she called out, looking up to see Detective Carla Simmons standing in the doorway. Carla was one of the few officers who had supported Tanya from the beginning, and Tanya always appreciated her honesty and dedication. "Chief," Carla said, stepping inside. "Can we talk for a minute?" Tanya gestured for her to sit down. "Of course, Detective." "What's on your mind?" Carla sat down and glanced around the room, making sure no one else was listening. "I've been noticing something lately," she began. "There's been a lot of tension between the officers, and I'm not sure if you've noticed, but some of them are really pushing back. It's not just Steve, it's others too. They're testing you, trying to see how far they can go without facing any consequences." Tanya sighed and leaned back in her chair. "I know, it's been tough, but I can't let them think they can get away with it. I have to stand my ground, even if it means making them uncomfortable." "I understand, Chief," Carla said. "But you also need to know that some of them are just waiting for you to slip up. They don't believe in your leadership, and they're trying to find any reason to prove they were right." Tanya nodded. "I've been dealing with it for a while now. It's frustrating, but I can't give up. If I show any weakness, they'll use it against me." Carla leaned forward. "You can't do this alone, Chief. You've got a lot of support in this department, but you need to let the others know that you won't tolerate this behavior. You have to make an example of someone." Tanya thought about it for a moment. She knew Carla was right. If she didn't take action, things would only get worse. She couldn't allow a small group of officers to undermine her authority. But who should she make an example of? It had to be someone who could send a strong message to the rest of the department. The next day, Tanya called a meeting with Officer Steve Hayes. She had decided that it was time to address his behavior once and for all. It was a hard decision, but Tanya knew it had to be done. She couldn't allow his subtle resistance to continue. When Steve walked into her office, he was visibly uncomfortable. Tanya didn't waste time with pleasantries. She got straight to the point. "Officer Hayes, I've noticed that you've been undermining my leadership in subtle ways. You've been late to meetings, you've avoided following through on assignments, and you've been openly disrespectful in front of the other officers. This is unacceptable." Steve opened his mouth to protest, but Tanya raised a hand to silence him. "I don't want excuses. I want you to understand that this behavior will not be tolerated. You're a senior officer, and your actions set an example for the rest of the department. If you can't follow the rules and respect your chief, then I'll have no choice but to take disciplinary action." Steve's face turned red, but he didn't argue. He knew he had crossed the line. I'm sorry, Chief. I didn't mean to disrespect you. It's just, this whole thing has been hard for me to accept." Tanya nodded, her tone firm. "I understand that change can be difficult. But you're not the only one struggling. Every officer in this department is adjusting to my leadership, and I expect everyone to do their part. If you can't handle that, then maybe this isn't the right place for you." Steve swallowed hard, clearly embarrassed. "I understand, Chief. I'll do better, I promise." Tanya held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "I'm giving you one more chance, Officer Hayes. Don't make me regret it." As Steve left her office, Tanya felt a sense of relief. It had been a difficult conversation, but it was necessary. She had drawn the line, and she was starting to see that her officers would either have to fall in line or face the consequences. It wasn't going to be easy, but Tanya was prepared to do whatever it took to earn the respect of her team. The day started like any other at the precinct. Officers were arriving, chatting in small groups, laughing at inside jokes, and preparing for the morning briefing. Maya Thompson walked through the door with the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades in law enforcement. She had seen it all: tough cases, stressful situations, and office politics, but nothing had prepared her for this particular moment. Today, she would finally step into her role as police chief. What made it extraordinary, however, was that the very officers who had been making her life difficult were still unaware that she now held the highest authority in the department. As she approached the briefing room, Maya noticed the same group of officers who had been subtly, and sometimes openly, harassing her. They were laughing together, unaware that their newest colleague was now the person in charge. Some of them were asking questions about her personal life. Others were making jokes that crossed the line of professional respect. Maya's expression remained calm, almost serene, as she observed them. She did not need to respond immediately. She knew the power of timing and strategy. Maya stepped into the room quietly, allowing the officers to continue their chatter. The tension was almost imperceptible at first, but she could feel the subtle shift in the air as her presence commanded attention. She waited until the room quieted down, then spoke in a firm but even tone. "Good morning, everyone. I have something important to share." The officers looked at her, curiosity replacing some of their earlier casual arrogance. Maya took a slow breath, making sure her words carried weight without sounding angry. "I am Chief Maya Thompson. Starting today, I will be leading this precinct. That means I am now responsible for all decisions, all operations, and all of you." For a moment, the room fell completely silent. Some officers blinked rapidly, trying to process what they had just heard. Others exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. It was clear that none of them had expected this announcement. The woman they had casually disrespected, the one they assumed would be quiet and compliant, was now their superior. Maya did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her calm authority filled the room, and every word she spoke seemed to resonate with the weight of experience. "I understand that some of you may be surprised. I also know that a few of you have treated me in ways that were unprofessional or disrespectful. That stops now. In this precinct, we work together as a team, and every member deserves respect. No one is above the rules, and no one is below them. We are all here to serve the community, and that is the standard I expect from everyone." Some officers shifted uneasily in their seats. One or two tried to make a joke, but Maya's gaze, steady and unwavering, silenced them instantly. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of quiet authority, the kind that demanded acknowledgement. She continued, speaking slowly and clearly, making sure that every word landed. "Harassment, favoritism, and disrespect have no place here. We are responsible for protecting the public, and that begins with how we treat each other. I know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be ignored, and even to be laughed at behind closed doors. I have experienced it firsthand, and I will not allow it in this precinct. From today forward, we operate with professionalism, fairness, and integrity." As she spoke, Maya could see the realization spreading across the faces of the officers. Some looked embarrassed, others defensive, and a few quietly impressed. They were starting to understand that the woman they had underestimated was not only capable but exceptionally competent. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone. Those who had tried to undermine her were now under her leadership. Maya paused, letting her words sink in. She knew that change would not happen overnight, but this moment was important. It was the first step in setting the tone for her leadership. "I am not here to punish anyone for past mistakes," she continued. "But I am here to create a workplace where everyone feels valued, where everyone is held accountable, and where we all work together to make a difference. That is my mission, and I know it can be ours as well. The officers began to nod slowly. One of them, the most outspoken of the group, finally spoke up. Chief Thompson, I didn't realize. His voice trailed off, unsure of what to say. Maya gave him a reassuring nod. That's all right. What matters now is what we do moving forward. Respect, teamwork, and service, those are our priorities. The room, once filled with casual chatter and subtle disrespect, was now filled with a sense of purpose. Maya could see the change beginning, small but significant. Officers were thinking about their actions, about the way they interacted with colleagues, and about the example they were setting for the community. Maya knew leadership was not about fear or intimidation. It was about earning trust, demonstrating competence, and inspiring others to rise to their best selves. She moved among the officers, shaking hands, listening to their concerns, and offering guidance. Each interaction reinforced the message she had delivered, that this was a precinct where fairness and professionalism mattered above all else. By the end of the day, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The officers who had once underestimated her were now observing her with respect and attention. Some approached her quietly to apologize, others simply nodded in acknowledgement. Maya received each reaction with grace, understanding that true leadership involved patience as much as authority. As she left the precinct that evening, Maya reflected on the day. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not because she had caught anyone off guard, but because she had set the foundation for lasting change. She knew there would be challenges ahead, that some officers might resist, and that old habits would need to be addressed. But for the first time, the precinct was moving in the right direction. Maya's experience as someone who had been underestimated and disrespected gave her a unique perspective. She understood the importance of empathy, fairness, and clear boundaries. And now, in her role as chief, she had the opportunity to create a workplace where every officer, regardless of background or rank, could feel respected and valued. As the lights of the precinct dimmed and the day came to a close, Maya stood at the entrance for a moment, looking back at the room where her journey as chief had begun. It was more than just a personal victory. It was a turning point for the entire department. She smiled to herself, knowing that leadership was not about making a statement or proving a point. It was about guiding, inspiring, and transforming the people around you, and that was exactly what she intended to do. The weeks after Maya Thompson took over as police chief were filled with small victories, challenges, and moments that tested her patience and leadership. The precinct, once a place where informal hierarchies and unspoken rules allowed disrespect to go unchecked, was slowly beginning to change. Officers who had once underestimated her were now observing her actions closely, realizing that leadership was more than a title. It was a demonstration of fairness, consistency, and vision. From the very first day, Maya focused on building trust. She visited every division in the precinct, listening carefully to the officers' concerns and ideas. She made it a point to ask questions, not just to give orders. Officers started opening up to her in ways they had never done before. Some shared frustrations about outdated procedures, others mentioned the need for better community engagement, and a few even admitted mistakes they had made in the past. Maya listened patiently, jotting down notes, and thanked everyone for their honesty. It was during these early days that the real work of leadership became clear. Change could not happen overnight, especially in a place where habits, attitudes, and traditions ran deep. Maya knew that some officers were resistant, some were skeptical, and some were simply unsure how to respond to her new leadership style. She met each situation with patience, calm authority, and gentle guidance, proving that discipline did not have to be harsh, and respect did not have to be demanded. It could be earned. One morning, a team of officers approached her with an idea for a new community program. They wanted to start a mentorship initiative for local youth, connecting young people with officers who could guide them toward education, sports, and positive choices. Maya smiled as she listened. This was exactly the kind of initiative she had hoped to encourage. She asked detailed questions, offered suggestions, and promised full support from the precinct. Over the next few months, the mentorship program became one of the precinct's most successful community outreach efforts, earning praise from parents, school officials, and local leaders. While the community-focused projects brought positive energy to the precinct, Maya also had to address lingering issues of internal culture. Some officers had difficulty adjusting to the new expectations of professionalism. A few moments of tension arose during meetings, and old habits of casual disrespect resurfaced now and then. Maya addressed these situations quickly but tactfully. She called private conversations when necessary, pointing out what behavior needed correction and why it mattered. She emphasized that accountability was not punishment. It was about creating an environment where everyone could succeed. Over time, these small but consistent interventions began to pay off. Officers started holding themselves and each other accountable, and morale gradually improved. The camaraderie in the precinct became stronger, with officers working together more effectively. Maya noticed how much more confident and collaborative the younger officers had become, inspired by the example of respect and fairness she set. Even those who had once resisted her leadership began to see the benefits of a workplace where everyone felt valued. One afternoon, Maya received a call from a community leader about a particularly delicate situation. A neighborhood had been struggling with rising concerns about safety and trust in law enforcement. Maya knew that the officer's approach to this issue would reflect the values she had been instilling in the precinct. She called a meeting with the team assigned to the area, reviewing their strategies, asking for input, and stressing the importance of empathy, listening, and fairness. When they went into the neighborhood, the officers acted with patience and care. They spent time talking to residents, listening to their concerns, and working together to find practical solutions. Maya observed quietly from the background, proud of the officers' professionalism. The trust that was being rebuilt in the community was a direct result of the new culture she had encouraged, one where respect and service mattered above all else. Back at the precinct, Maya continued to lead by example. She made herself available to any officer who needed guidance, whether it was a difficult case, a personal challenge, or a question about procedure. She celebrated successes publicly, highlighting officers who demonstrated integrity, teamwork, and creativity. She never shied away from difficult conversations, but she always approached them with fairness and understanding. Slowly, the precinct became a place where officers were motivated not by fear or rank, but by pride in their work and confidence in their leadership. Maya also began holding regular workshops on topics such as community engagement, leadership, and conflict resolution. She invited outside experts to speak, encouraged officers to share their experiences, and fostered an environment where learning was valued as much as enforcement. The workshops became popular, not because they were mandatory, but because officers found them genuinely useful. They appreciated having a leader who invested in their growth, both professionally and personally. Despite all these changes, Maya never forgot the moment she had first revealed herself as chief to the officers who had harassed her. That memory reminded her of the power of calm authority and strategic patience. She often shared stories of challenges she had faced in her career, not to boast, but to teach lessons about resilience, empathy, and fairness. Her experiences became tools to guide others, showing that leadership was not about asserting power, but about inspiring others to be their best selves. Over the months, the precinct earned recognition from local authorities and the community. Crime rates were gradually decreasing, relationships between officers and residents improved, and the overall atmosphere in the station was transformed. Officers were more cooperative, motivated, and professional, reflecting the culture Maya had worked so hard to build. The change was tangible, and the community noticed it. Parents spoke about feeling safer, local schools praised the mentorship programs, and civic leaders acknowledged the precinct's new reputation as a model of accountability and service. Maya's leadership extended beyond the precinct walls. She started attending town meetings, speaking at community events, and fostering partnerships with other organizations. She made it clear that law enforcement was not about control or intimidation. It was about service, trust, and mutual respect. Her example inspired other precincts in the city to adopt similar programs, showing that positive leadership could ripple outward and create wider change. Despite her many responsibilities, Maya remained approachable and grounded. She took time to recognize the efforts of individual officers, celebrated milestones, and maintained open lines of communication. Officers knew they could bring concerns or ideas to her without fear of judgment. This accessibility further strengthened morale and reinforced the culture of respect she had established. As the year progressed, Maya reflected on how far the precinct had come. She thought about the officers who had once underestimated her, the challenges she had faced in asserting her authority, and the successes that had followed. She realized that true leadership was never about a single moment of triumph. It was about consistent, thoughtful action over time. By staying true to her principles, she had transformed not only the precinct, but also the lives of the people who worked there and the community they served. The story of Maya Thompson's leadership became well known in the city. She was celebrated not only as a competent and fair police chief, but as a leader who had turned adversity into opportunity. She had faced disrespect, harassment, and doubt, and had responded not with anger, but with strategy, patience, and a commitment to excellence. The officers who had once doubted her now admired her, the community trusted her, and the precinct thrived under her guidance. In her office one evening, Maya looked out the window at the precinct below. Officers were finishing their shifts, chatting with each other, laughing, and leaving for home with a sense of purpose. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than a personal victory. It was a transformation of the entire precinct, a demonstration that respect, fairness, and leadership could create lasting change. Maya knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she was ready. She had proven that leadership, when guided by integrity and empathy, could inspire everyone to be better, not just as officers, but as people. And with that, Maya turned away from the window, ready to continue her work, confident that the precinct she led was no longer just a place of authority. It was a place of respect, growth, and hope for the entire community.